Matthew chapter 7. This is part of the Sermon on the Mount. If you're familiar with the Sermon on the Mount, you know it's several chapters. So it's a long message that Jesus preached to a large crowd. And there is a lot of content. There are a lot of different topics that Jesus covered. But one of those is part of where I want to go with this idea of the road less traveled. So Matthew chapter 7. On the screen here, this is just a short passage, but I want you to see that this was part of the teaching of Jesus. And he said this, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." So at the heart of Jesus' teaching was this concept: the road is narrow, and few find it. Okay, there's a lot going on there, I think, so we're going to try to do that. So my question today is this: how do we find it? How do we find the road less traveled? How do we find the narrow path that Jesus was talking about? How do we successfully navigate those times in our lives when we have to make decisions and the road is forked maybe more than one or two or three directions, but we can't go all of them, and we have to find the one that really fits our direction, and it finds description here in what Jesus was talking about. Because whether we like it or not, part of what is thrust upon us when we choose to follow Christ is that we can't just go any path we want to. We're not allowed just to kind of go through life any direction and go the same direction that everybody else is going. It's often true culturally. I don't know if you're aware of it, but we don't live in a Christian nation anymore. Have you noticed that? We just don't. I mean, we kind of have that illusion because there's churches everywhere. But if we follow our culture today, we're not going to end up on the less traveled road. We're going to end up on a broad road that leads to destruction. And so we have to be the people that choose to follow the narrow path, because the road is narrow and few find it. So in preparing this week, I was thinking about what are the scriptures, what are the passages that speak to this reality that a disciple has to be one that carefully chooses the path that they go down. And they have to be willing to go down the path that's not as traveled by. And I want to read just this little short passage. This is in Proverbs chapter 3. This is fridge art. We're probably very familiar with it. Here's what it says: "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths." So, in talking about this topic, I want us to look at these three very simple principles. The first one is this: trust the Lord with all your heart. When I graduated from college in 1990, I had a Bachelor of Science in Education. I graduated at midterm. And from the time I graduated until I was given a job, I interviewed 7 different times and was turned down. I interviewed at Coleman High School, interviewed at Comanche High School, interviewed at 4 schools in San Antonio. By the time I walked out of the 5th or 6th interview, I thought something is wrong with me. I must have hit my head and I didn't know it. I didn't pay attention in college. I'm like, God, what is going on with this business of finding a school? So a guy who grew up in a town with 3,000 people with 2 traffic lights that started flashing at 10 o'clock at night found himself in interview number 7 at the Northside, this is in San Antonio, Northside School District Alternative School. At that time, Northside School District had over 55,000 students. It was like the 3rd largest in the state of Texas, and their buses drove more miles than any district in Texas. That's exactly where a guy from a town of 3,000 should be. And I walk into Dr. Caroline Warnley's office at the district, and I don't know how to explain it. I don't think I would be exaggerating to say that I had a God moment, because in the other interviews, I felt stupid. In the other interviews, I didn't feel confident. In the other interviews, they basically just said, "Okay, thanks for coming in, see ya." But in this interview, about halfway through the interview, she lowered her glasses, and she stared across the table, and she said, "We have a job for you. I'm going to make some phone calls. Don't leave town." And the next day, she sent me to the alternative school. Now, I had heard of gang members, but I'd never seen one. We didn't have those in Wills Point, Texas. And the school that I went to was full of people I don't mean talked about gangs. I don't mean wish they could be in a gang. I meant they actually were in a gang. I had 2 students murdered while I was there. I had a student that showed me a gunshot wound through his hand, and that was the initiation to get into the gang. You had to put your hand on the table and be shot to enter the gang. I had another student who got his throat slit, and they dumped him in a river. He pretended to be dead as he floated down the river, and then he got up and ran away and survived that gang hit. So that, you think of all of that, and I remember going through the interview, and these 2 principals interviewed me, and I walk out the door, and I'm like, this is nothing like the other interviews that I went to. It just felt completely different. Because the interview of her, the person at the personnel office, she sent me the next day the principals, both of them interviewed, and I'm walking out to my car, and I'm going, and I remember I was talking to God, I'm like, God, this is really weird if I end up at this school. And Dr. David Ibanez chased me down in the parking lot with his business card and said, Mr. Wilburn, hang on before you leave. Here's my number, here's my card. Call them at the office, tell them that we're giving you the job, and we'll go do the paperwork. It's your job. And I get in my car, and I drive over to Loop 410, and I'm sitting at the traffic light, and I'm like, God, I think this is you, but I'm not completely sure. Will you please help me, because I'm shaking. Because I'm going to end up at a school that is completely out of my context. I don't understand this. But if this is you, would you let me in? And I knew it was me. Ironically, actually not ironically at all, Nanda would move from Long Island to San Antonio to be close to family and get a job about 2 exits from where I was in the same school district. God had his hands on, and I met people at that school. But here's what I'm saying about that. That somehow we have to be a people that we do exactly what it says here in the Proverbs. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Even when your heart doesn't understand, even when it doesn't make sense that you're there, somehow you say, God, I trust you. I don't mean like sweet, like Valentine card, trust you. I mean like, I trust you when it doesn't make sense. I trust you when it scares me. I trust you when nothing looks like it's going to work out. God, I trust you. Because the road that is less traveled is a road that is filled with people who trust Him. They trust Him. Say, God, somehow you're going to make sense out of this. God, I don't know. And out of their mouth are coming words that don't fit the circumstance. Even before you get to the healing, you're already talking about the healing. Even before you get to the place where your bills are paid and you're struggling to pay your bills and something finally happens, you're already talking about it before you get there. Because why? Because you trust Him. And I want to say to Schaefer today, Schaefer, you can trust Him. When you go to Mexico, you can trust Him. You're going to learn Spanish faster than you thought you would. The coffee's going to be better than you thought it would. The climbing's you can trust Him. He's going to be with you. He's going to provide everything that you need when you get down to Mexico. Number 2 is this: do not lean on your own understanding. Isn't it funny? I think God gives us brains for a reason. We're supposed to use them. We're supposed to be logical. We're supposed to be creative. We're supposed to be all of those things. And then when it comes to the time when we're standing there to make decisions, here's what He says: don't trust on what you understand. Isn't that weird? I mean, actually, think about it. It's sort of counterintuitive. Like God says, I want you to understand my ways. And when you need to make a decision, I don't want you to understand what you understand. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, think about it. It's completely counterintuitive. Don't lean on your own understanding. Lean on an understanding that's the Ancient of Days. It's His Spirit that teaches you. It's listening to a voice that says something that doesn't make sense in your context and in your natural deal, and you somehow can learn to lean on that. I want to say to Schaefer today that you already know His voice. And as I've prayed for you this week, I believe the Lord would say to you today that He's going to teach you to know His voice at a deeper and deeper level. That you're going to go on high places. And I don't believe that you climbing mountains and going to the mountains is just about the physical mountains that you will climb, but it's about the spiritual places that the Lord will take you. And He's going to teach you to not lean on your own understanding, but to be expanded and broadened. And there's going to be a day when you're going to come back and tell us about those experiences and help us continue to develop our faith because of God's gift in you. So trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. So acknowledge Him in everything you do. I'm not a real big, go through the checkout line, have a blessed day kind of guy. It's not my speed, but I appreciate people that say it. But I do believe that there has to be an authenticity to our faith where we say, I acknowledge Him in everything that I do. I mean, I think it's why we pray in the mornings. Why it should be a good idea to spend time in prayer and meditation and scripture reading, because it resets us before the day starts. That, Lord, before I even step out the door and have my first phone call, before I answer my first text, before I look at Facebook the first time, before I start thinking about what I got to do to make a living today, I want to acknowledge You, that You are with me, that You're going to speak to me, that You're going to be active in my life, that faith is not an abstract concept. It's an everyday reality. Where my feet go, You go with me, because the Lord orders the steps of the righteous. So it's like that. And then I want to close with this. I like this phrase at the end. It kind of fits the road less traveled. If you do this, if you trust in the Lord with all your heart, if you lean not on your understanding, if you acknowledge Him in all your ways, it's almost like a formula, but it's not a formula. But if you do those things, what's the promise? He shall direct your paths. Now check this out. This is where looking at different Bible translations can be very helpful. He shall direct your paths. Here, one translation says it this way: He shall make your paths straight. I think I'm talking to some people today that I would say to you, aren't you tired of walking crooked paths? Aren't you tired of nominally following Jesus but not totally selling your heart out? And because of that, your life is a winding road. And Jesus would come to you today and say, if you will do these things, I can make your path straight. You can walk down it. It's like driving to Lubbock. You don't even need to touch the steering wheel, right? It's just straight. I mean, it's a better life. I don't know about you. I tried a few things before I sold totally out. I mean, it's a better life. It's a straight path. It's a path of comfort and peace and ease because He is with us on it. So He will make your paths straight. One translation says it this way: He will make your paths smooth. What about you? Some of you today, you're sitting there and you're considering certain things, but you're not fully committed. And somewhere you can make a wholehearted commitment. And you, aren't you tired of the bumpy road? Aren't you tired of your relationships being bumpy, your finances being bumpy? Aren't you tired of the bumps? Aren't you tired of the bumpy roads? And so you can give that over. And then in the Amplified, it translates that phrase this way: He will remove the obstacles from your path. So I don't know where we all live, but I know this, that following Jesus is a really good idea. That giving your heart to Him and following Him, acknowledging Him, trusting Him, learning to listen for His voice, learning to love His voice, to be committed to, God, I'm not going to move until I hear Your voice. One time they said to Jesus, we should go up to the temple because everybody goes to the temple. It was one of the festivals, and His guys were like, why aren't we down here in this part? We should go to the temple because everybody is going to the temple. You know what He did? He didn't move an inch. You know why? It's what He said in the Gospel of John. He said, I only do what I see the Father doing. I only say what I hear the Father saying. This is the less traveled road. This is the path where there's life and righteousness. And He went to the temple, but He didn't go when they went. He went when the Father said go. And this is the disciples' life.